This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast, the final AP Top 25 College Football Podcast of the 2019 season. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. My guests this week, my guests, plural, are Dan Wolken and Paul Myerberg, both of USA Today. We're coming at you from New Orleans, the day after LSU won a national championship. We'll discuss the greatness of Joe Burrow and his magical season, plus what to make of this LSU team's place in college football history. As for Clemson, the Trevor Lawrence hype train hit its first speed bump. What did we learn about him and those Tigers? Then we'll spin it ahead to 2020 and talk about the stories that will likely define next college football season. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcast, just about anywhere you get your podcast. Please subscribe, and if so inclined, give us a good review. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans. And away we go. It is the morning after the national championship game. We are still in New Orleans, trying to wrap up LSU's national championship and the 2020 season. You will hear some ambient noise behind us. Paul Myerberg from USA Today, Dan Wolken from USA Today joining me to put a capper on the season. The party is still just sort of breaking down here in New Orleans. We will hit the national championship game and look forward to 2020. I will identify the guys right before they speak. So, Paul, thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, I'm sitting in a beanbag right now, Ralph. I don't really love the setting.
You don't? I thought the beanbags were an appropriate spot to do this.
Who likes a beanbag? Was there ever a point in your life when you're like, oh, I love the beanbag? I mean, this is. I'm also going to be on a flight today. We're going to be flying United and Delta. Wolken's going to be first class, obviously, but I'm going to be sitting in coach, really uncomfortable. This is the start of a lower back pain day.
Okay, clearly this is the first topic. Do you like the beanbag chairs?
I'm happy with them, yeah. And by the way, I'm sit with the people, man. I'm economy, maybe economy plus sometimes, but not first class.
He sits with the people. He doesn't necessarily mingle with the people, but he does allow them to be around him.
I am one of those people who, like, just when random folks will come up to me in a weird setting and say, what do you do for a living? There's always that moment where you have to think about, do I really want to tell the truth here? Because then it could get into a whole topic and I could spend the next 2 minutes or 2 hours answering sports questions. Yeah. And sometimes you just aren't, like, up for that. But we'll see how it goes today.
Well, you're gonna spend at least the next half an hour or so answering sports questions. So I'm gonna start with you, Paul. LSU wins the national championship going away. I think we all wrote some version of this might be the greatest season ever by an individual player. Where does LSU's individual season rank in college football history? And that seems can be a little bit prisoner of the moment, and maybe it gets slammed as being hyperbole. But the numbers sort of back up that what LSU has done was pretty special. Did you at all feel tentative about sort of proclaiming this? I'm going to start with Dan, because your column hit pretty quickly. Did you feel at all tentative about sort of proclaiming Burrow as the greatest ever?
No, because first of all, you take a look at the teams they beat. A bunch of blue bloods, a bunch of highly ranked teams that finished in the polls. Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, you go on down the line, they beat a bunch of, Auburn, Florida, and they did it with relative ease. They were hardly challenged this year, and Joe Burrow didn't have a bad game this year, not one. There was not a single moment of the season where you felt like Joe Burrow was having a difficult night. He wasn't reading things. He wasn't able to get the ball downfield or see his receivers. He just kind of breezed through it. I'm sure it wasn't as easy as he made it look, but I just don't think the numbers, the proficiency, the efficiency, it's all there to me.
You always have a really good perspective, actually, on history, Paul. So when you start looking at where not just Burrow, but this team will lay in the landscape of college football, it's unlikely that they will be coming back and repeating this. Certainly, even if they were to repeat as champions, I don't think they could possibly repeat this. But as a one-off year in your memory, does this rank somewhere? Did you even try to do that?
Yeah, I'm with Dan in that I'm comfortable putting Burrow into a very elite group based on what he did this year. Because I thought, like Dan said, perfection of the only degree of perfection you can actually achieve as an athlete or a quarterback. I mean, you're not going to complete 100% of your passes, but you're completing 78%. You've thrown 60 touchdowns. You've had 65 total touchdowns, 5,500 yards. I'm comfortable saying Burrow had one of the great individual seasons by a player in the history of the sport. Not as comfortable saying 2019 LSU is one of the great teams of all time. I do think that when you sit down in 2030 and you talk about the last 50 years, you'll probably put them on a list with 01 Miami, maybe 11 Alabama, 12 Alabama, and 95 whatever Nebraska. Here's the thing that I feel about 2019 LSU. There's going to be a 2020 version of 2019 LSU. There's going to be a team that's unbelievable on offense, that goes 15-0, that you have in this conversation for, is it the best ever, the greatest ever, whatever. I think they're the beginning of a trend in terms of being able to find ways schematically to take advantage of the talent that you find in the Southeast and the SEC. Certainly the best team in program history in the conversation for the last generation. I don't know if I'd put them in a historic sense against every team that you think about.
One of the hard problems about this discussion is when you start to look back in history, we tend to look at the rosters and say, oh yeah, this guy in the NFL was this, and this. He was a Hall of Famer in the NFL. And that really, to me, skews. Like when we talk about 2001 Miami and all the talent that team had, it's largely based on what those guys accomplished after college football. And I think that really makes it hard to start comparing from different years. Because if you look at what that team did and how that team won, that was not as impressive as what LSU just did.
To jump off Paul's point, it sort of is reflective of the nature of where the sport is now, though, because again, just as Paul said, like you're going to see these glitzy, unstoppable offenses. The nature of the scoring being up means you will have more game. You'll have teams that'll put up these 50 spots. There'll be gaudy yardage marks that just didn't exist back in those days, and sometimes the margins of victory will be inflated because of those things.
Yeah, by the way, I've said to you on this podcast that 01 Miami is overrated as one of the great teams of all time, yes. And I think you were like, "Wow, you're dumb, you're an idiot." And then Wolken's like, and you're like, "Oh, Dan, that's incredibly smart, incredibly nuanced." I
didn't agree with Dan. I just didn't.
I agree with Dan. I think 01 Miami is overrated as an individual college football team. I think evolution in college football, coaching-wise, used to exist on the margins. Used to be that the wackiness and the X's and O's and the genius, quote unquote, of coaching you'd see on the WAC. The spread started small. It started on high school level to Division III to NAIA to Rich Rod at small schools to Tulane to wherever. So to me, like to your point, 2019 LSU is the sinking of schemes and talent, and it's the example and an epitome of big time schools being. I mean, it's not really a gamble for LSU. They had to do it. But at some point, big-time schools took a gamble, as Alabama did with Saban when they went up-tempo, 6 years ago, to marry what they have in terms of athleticism and talent and NFL-ready, positional talent with the stuff that guys were doing on the margins, the spread and up-tempo and all that stuff. So, yes, someone else will do what LSU did this year. If not in 2020, then in 2021, 2022, because you're seeing it. Coaching is meeting talent in big-time college football.
So there's really not much to break down off of last night's game. It's not like there was a key play that flipped things. And Clemson Listen, the way we tend to consume college football and look at it, there's a tendency, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of fans that say Clemson got exposed, right? Which I think is kind of nonsense, and I think the nature, again, of college football is the great offenses just aren't stopped. You just don't stop the great offenses. But clearly, this was a Clemson team that I won't necessarily use the word exposed, but this was a Clemson team that did not have the horses that it has had in recent years. Is there any reason to believe that? Well, let me put it to you this way, Paul. Like, what was missing from this year's Clemson team? You picked them to win this game, and I think I'm guessing in part because it's become hard to pick against them in this game.
Yeah, that's exactly why. I think the big difference is several people said afterwards, including several coaches. When last year's team could send 4 All-Americans at the quarterback, they could do whatever they wanted. And I do believe that if you had just taken those 4 guys, I mean, this is not like a grand statement. You take those 4 guys, Wilkins, Farrell, Bryant, Lawrence, and you put them on this year's team, they beat LSU last night because 4 All-Americans on the defensive line. It's like the Giants when they beat the Patriots. I think the issue last night, and this is Jeff Scott, Streeter, Tony Elliott, I mean, just execution. I don't think those guys said last night, or the players even believed last night, that they got outplayed or that they're the worst team. LSU was a better team last night. There's 365 days a year. Sometimes you have a bad day. Sometimes you have a good one. So, I think inconsistency and efficiency more so than Clemson's not in LSU's class. I don't think anyone believes that.
Yeah, I felt at one point last night, Dan, that, I thought Venables actually did a pretty good job, and that Clemson's defense played fairly well, and then you looked at the end, they gave up 628 yards and 42 points.
Yeah, like the first quarter of the game and into the second quarter, Venables was having to work really hard to find different ways or different looks to give Burrow that were confusing him. I mean, the first quarter was actually, I thought, kind of a defensive masterclass in terms of just scheming, because they were presenting a picture to Burrow that he was struggling with in terms of just a lot of the chaos and bringing some pressure that from weird angles, and it's a long game, and they eventually figured it out, and they eventually found the matchups they wanted to find. But I think Paul's right, just the sense that Clemson did what they could defensively, with the fact that they didn't have a great defensive line this year. They couldn't do it for 60 minutes, and I do think the game certainly could have been different had Clemson's offense executed some things early that they missed. But I want to just go back to the whole thing about just the bigger picture. At some point, does the rules need to change to not favor offenses so much? Is there something that needs to be done? Is what we've seen going to be something that people want going forward out of college football?
There is seemingly a never-ending trend upward, right? And it's been almost 20 years now that the offenses are getting better. They're taking smaller steps forward, but it does seem like every year interceptions go down, touchdown passes go up, efficiency goes up. So let's stick with that before I get to the Trevor Lawrence question. Are we getting to the point where have we reached maximum offense to the point where maybe this needs to be dialed back?
I don't know what the fix is. Is it running clock? Is it stopping the clock on first downs? Is that one way to lessen plays, lower offensive efficiency? We sound like Nick Saban 6 years ago. Is this the game? This is the way we want football to be? But it's the way football is. I mean, how much more can it get? I mean, it's only 60 minutes. I mean, how much more scoring could there be? I mean, I don't know what rules you can put into play on a specific Saturday that would change that.
Dan, let me ask you about Trevor Lawrence. He's got one more year coming back. Clemson is going to be very good. We'll sort of look ahead to 2020. But did we learn anything about Trevor Lawrence yesterday, maybe in Ohio State, that we hadn't learned before? In some ways, he faced adversity for the first time in his career in both of those games.
Yeah, I mean, look, expecting a guy to play perfect in any sport every single time, they're not robots. They are human beings, and I don't know that we'll ever have a reason why he missed some throws or was a little bit off when last year in some similar situations against really good players at Alabama, he made those plays. It's just unknowable. But, yeah, he didn't have a great game. I'm sure that will be the big talking point around Clemson all offseason, is how they didn't finish and how he didn't play well in the championship. And and he'll go into next season with, some motivation, although that's a cliche, but I think it's probably true in this case, to come back strong as a junior and finish out his college career with a title. And I'm sure, look, the guy had a really good year. Didn't make the Heisman finalists, but I think next year there'll be an emphasis on starting fast. I think there'll be a program-wide emphasis on making him a Heisman guy. That's just even though they'll deny it, I think that's what they're going to want to do. And I don't think we learned that he's a bum. Like, the guy's really good. He just didn't work out last night.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Trevor the last couple of games? And maybe did you see anything about him that was either in any way troublesome? We've already anointed him the 2021 first draft pick. We've anointed him a guy who, if he went into the draft last year, he would have been the first overall pick. So there's now he will face what happens is that, because he had so much hype early on, we have been hearing 3 years of hype, so there will naturally be a pushback against him. Fans will get tired of hearing how he's the second coming, so any crack in the armor, and now we finally have seen a crack, will be jumped on to say, like, oh, no, you guys are just hyping this guy. But, as you watch him play and as you've been around him, is there any reason to think that we have overhyped Trevor Lawrence?
Oh, God, no. And Dan said, nobody's perfect. It's just that we expected Lawrence to be perfect. Mm-hmm. We expected him to be perfect. He's not. Worst performance of his career by a long shot. I mean, it's not even a close second. I mean, the close second is Syracuse because he only played 2 quarters. Not even close. Again, 2 weeks ago against Ohio State, I thought that was an all-time performance by a quarterback given the stakes. So if you're not all in on Trevor Lawrence because of one day, then I don't know what to say. Like Dan said, he's going to enter next year as a Heisman favorite. Clemson should promote him for the Heisman. I think that was a mistake the last time with Deshaun, that they didn't do it enough. And fully expect him to bounce back. And if you're not, you're going to take one game and roll with it. I don't know what to say. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is still one of the best quarterback prospects to come out since Manning.
All right, so we're going to take a very quick break on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. Come back with Paul Myerberg from USA Today, Dan Wolken from USA Today, and we're going to spin this forward. I'm going to ask these guys what they're looking towards for next season as, storylines and who might be the top teams and any other interesting things. Quick break on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
And we're back. So 2019 is in the bag. It was a pretty interesting season. It was all about LSU, but we're moving on. Moving on to 2020 already. Dan, I'll start with you, and we'll probably come back and bounce around a couple of different ideas. But when I say to you, like, what are you interested in heading into 2020? What will be sort of at least one of the storylines that will define the 2020 season, or at least the start of the 2020 season?
Well, I think you can start with LSU and who's going to be there. Is Joe Brady coming back to LSU? There's obviously going to be a new quarterback, and you win a national title, and that's really cool. People move on pretty quick and want something else and want more. Is LSU going to be able to do that? Joe Burrow, and I sort of wrote this after the Peach Bowl. Because I've had a lot of conversations about this. Is this a one-off kind of thing for LSU? I mean, you've got a 23-year-old quarterback who had a perfect season, and a 30-year-old passing game coordinator who now everybody wants, and guy nobody knew a year ago, and is suddenly going to be making like $2 million a year. It's just some very unusual, unique circumstances, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on LSU to keep going, and yet you're in a neighborhood with Alabama. They're not going to be satisfied with what happened. Auburn's going to be good. Again, you've got Georgia and Florida both strong, so it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, the thing that I wrote in my 2020 look ahead was I used the word one-off like you did with LSU. Alabama is not going anywhere. I clearly think that what Orgeron has here has the potential to be something that can match Alabama. Possibly has the potential to be that, but I don't know. I don't know if he has the potential to truly go year to year and make that a rivalry with Alabama, a real rivalry.
Yeah, and Alabama bounce back is my probably right now off-season storyline that I'm paying most attention to. I think this is a Burrow thing, not a Brady thing. All due respect to Joe Brady. I mean, but if he's the reason why Joe Burrow and this offense is that good, he shouldn't get $2 million. He should get $5 million, $6 million. I mean, if you're that much of a genius, I mean, come on. This is a one-off in the sense that next year's team is not going to be this year's team.
Well, but we'll see. I mean, if Miles Brennan, if this becomes Oklahoma South, Deep South, and every quarterback steps into this offense and becomes a Heisman Trophy candidate, then maybe Brady is that. Feel
free to tag me on Old Takes Exposed with this one. Miles Brennan is not Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. Pretty safe. And look, like, one thing Alabama has done is get to a point where 11-2 Citrus Bowl beating Michigan and Harbaugh, and it's a disappointment. And LSU is nowhere near that. I mean, if they go 10-3 next year, the goodwill will continue for Ed Orgeron.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the question of whether they can beat Alabama once, yeah, they proved it, and God bless them, and they'll hang a banner and they'll remember this team for a long time. I think beating Alabama twice is the hard thing, and a lot of teams have tried to do it and failed. Manziel, A&M, and Bo Wallace did it somehow, but everyone else has failed.
All right, where else are you going, Dan? Maybe coaching situations, maybe teams, maybe a broader issue in college football.
Well, we've talked about expansion a lot and whether the playoff's going to go to 8. And, I'm fine if it wants to go to 8. I just don't think there's that many teams that are in that category that can win national titles in any given year. And I think you saw this year, I mean, there's just a hard break outside that top 3. Oklahoma can do whatever they want to do in the Big 12. They seem woefully short on talent in games like this. The Pac-12, there's going to be a ton of preseason hype about Oregon, even though we don't know who the quarterback's going to be there either. And like what they've done within the context of the Pac-12, what they've built, how they've recruited, it's all good stuff. But I'm just sort of waiting for that next team to do what Clemson did, to make that leap that Clemson made. And I don't really see it out there, but it'll be fun to try. I mean, we all want something new. Is Oregon really the thing that does it? I don't know. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And no, Oregon wouldn't, in my mind, wouldn't be that Clemson because of the success they've had. You know what I mean? Like within the last decade. It is really interesting to think. If you close your eyes and imagine who's the team that's doing what Clemson did was it 2013 when they beat LSU?
Yeah.
That was a turning point. Who's the team that's doing that in 2020? You got to really close your eyes and think about what team, what program, what coach has what it takes to join the club. And Ralphie wrote about it this week. The lack of parity to me is an issue. Not like an issue to the sport, which makes billions and people watch. I just think it's an issue in general. It's just an issue. I mean, it's something that you don't want to see from a sport is to have, again, next year, Alabama / LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson are your top 3, 4, and everyone else is just kind of hanging around.
Right. Maybe it's Georgia who finally breaks through. And actually, I got to get Dan's opinion on this because he lives in Georgia's backyard, and I know he always has strong opinions about Georgia. When you look at the team that might break through, that's already sort of in that, they're right in that class as far as how they're recruiting. But in some ways, they were closer 2 years ago because they almost beat Tua, if not for second and 27. And the last 2 years, they haven't even gotten to the playoff. So I've got an eye on what next year will be like for Georgia. Kirby is certainly not on the hot seat, but the thing becomes a little different next year if all of a sudden, Florida maybe gains a little bit. And how are we going to look at Georgia next year with a new quarterback and no Fromm? And what is Kirby's status?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. And Georgia fans are all excited about Jamie Newman, the grad transfer from Wake Forest. And maybe they should be. I think generally we tend to sort of overrate transfers and because they're on the market and it's kind of the new shiny object. I'm not sure that they've upgraded a quarterback from Jake Fromm. But they've also got a new offensive line there. They're going to lose DeAndre Swift. they've just had a hard time at Georgia sort of marrying all the elements that you need. They've had, in different years, a good enough defense to win a championship or a good enough running game to win a championship or whatever, but they just haven't quite had everything going in the same direction at the level you need to in the biggest moments, and that includes coaching. I mean, Kirby's second half, fourth quarter decision-making in some of these spots where they've had chances to beat Alabama, they go conservative or whatever. That's sort of been an issue, and they're trying to win differently than LSU won this year. They're not hyper-aggressive, opening it up, throwing the ball all over the place, pushing it down the field. They're trying to be the Alabama of 2010, 11, 12, and I don't know that that's really going to be the right way to do it. And if they don't make a coordinator change, which doesn't appear they are, if they don't find their analog of Joe Brady and change what they do on offense, and it still looks like it did this year, and they lose, a couple of their big rivalry games, and it's 10-2, there will start to be some discontent about just the way it looks. Even though, yes, they're winning, they should be winning. It's Georgia.
Yeah, I want to say about Georgia, the idea that they would embrace being that early decades Alabama, when you see that Alabama and LSU, what they are doing, it's mind-boggling to me that you would make that choice, the conscious choice to run this antiquated offense. It's like old European armies that showed up for World War II with horses. You know what I mean? And everyone else had tanks. They're like, well, this is how we do things. We use horses. It's spears. And then they got annihilated and destroyed. And we'll move off of Georgia, but it makes no sense to me at all that you would choose to stick with what's not working. When you just watched LSU tweak their system with their talent and put in the greatest offensive season of all time. Makes no sense.
The two other coaches, because I did something in my look ahead, sort of like varying degrees of hot seat. And the hot seat thing is always kind of, easy fodder. But I had on there, and again, when I use hot seat, I'm using that term super loosely, Tom Herman and Jimbo Fisher, in that both of them next year, neither is going to, Jimbo's certainly not getting fired, and Herman, I guess if things got really sideways, could, but I think next year does look like a very pivotal year in Texas between the two former rivals, and so as you're looking towards 2020, as far as Texas and Texas A&M, Paul, what needs to happen there?
Well, I mean, A&M's got, I don't want to say a joke of a schedule to be disrespectful, but it's a breeze of a schedule up until the last two. They play LSU and Alabama to finish. Looking at their schedule and what they have, they
have Auburn on there too.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying just generally speaking, if you look at that schedule, if they're not 8-2, then it's a disaster. So I think A&M is in position to imitate the part of a team on the rise or a program on the rise. To me, Fisher and A&M have the same issue as Kirby Smart. They're stuck in the past. They're boring and dull in a league that is anything but at this point. So I'd like, if I were an A&M person and I want to see the program succeed, I'd want to see either a change at quarterback or open things up offensively, because they can go 8-2 against those teams and lose the final two because they don't have the talent to match up with LSU and Alabama. They have to out-scheme them.
I'll bounce to you, Dan, for Herman and where he is going into, it would be year 4 now.
Yeah, it's so I've been trying to think of whether or not there's been a coach who basically did a staff purge the way Herman did this year to blow out everybody essentially and start over, and whether that's worked anywhere, in a situation where you've basically got 1 year to get it right. I can't think of one. I don't think it's indicative of a healthy overall situation and culture there. I think Herman is the kind of person who does not wear well, and I think there's a lot of friction, a lot of aggro with him and just everyone there. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't have a lot of faith in him turning it around.
That's interesting. Brian Kelly comes to mind.
Yeah.
When he did his major overhaul, but that was several years into a time there, and they went to a BCS championship game. It went sideways, and then he did it. Herman's in year 4 doing this, and again, I don't think without quite as much confidence. At least Kelly had some credibility in the bank, right? To have that 4-win season, bounce back, okay, I'm going to change things, and it certainly worked out well for Notre Dame. Herman doesn't have that credibility in the bank, and it can't help but frame Herman against some of the other people he was in the AAC with at the time, specifically Matt Rule, and think that Herman was the superstar. Matt Rule was the guy who went to Baylor, and people went, oh, really? Why do that? And now it looks like maybe they pegged the wrong guy to be maybe not. We'll see. But again, do you think he could get fired after next year?
Yes, I do. Chris Delcani didn't hire him, the athletic director of Texas, now. Did not hire Tom Herman. That was a decision made before he arrived. So in any situation like that, when it's not going well, you do have to wonder if the athletic director is less patient than he would otherwise be. And the other thing is just, like, there's certain coaches who are likable. It may not be working out or they may not be winning as much, but people are rooting for them to succeed. Like, I don't think Tom Herman is likable in that way. I don't think there's a bunch of people around Texas like, man, we love Tom Herman. We really hope it works out because he's just such a good dude. We're just rooting for him. I don't think that's the way it goes with Tom Herman. So I think there's less patience there.
Well, I mean, listen, that's the Clay Helton thing, right? I mean, yeah. I might as well touch on Clay because this is his last chance. But one of the reasons why he got a last chance is because he is a fundamentally decent human being by all accounts. I don't know Clay that well, but everybody seems to have that measure of him. Is that a doomed situation at USC? Is it almost painful? I mean, they could be walking into a season where it could be just painful to watch Clay Helton sort of flail around without a whole lot of support, with recruiting down, and oh, by the way, you open against Alabama.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be like a 6-6 team. Are they going to be 12-0? Are they going to make a Rose Bowl? I think they can make a Rose Bowl run. I think the Pac-12 South seems much more open than this past year when you knew Utah was the be-all.
Utah's going to take a pretty significant step back next year.
Yeah, I think Utah's probably an 8-win team. I think Southern California is a top 20 team, talent-wise. And you make a good point about Helton. People around USC, people who work there, certainly the big money boosters who expect more aren't fans, but people who spend time with him are huge fans of Clay Helton. People who are at LSU, who once were at USC, love Clay Helton. So that's a big difference, like Dan said. Tom Herman doesn't have that, and Clay does. How that translates to 2020, I don't really know. But if you keep Graham Harrell, you return 2 quarterbacks who you know can play for you. You're not adding in a lot of talent, but you're returning enough to go 9-3. To me, the immediate future at USC is not so bleak, but I think everyone kind of agrees to a consensus that the long-term future under Clay Helton is where it gets dicey. I just don't know if he's the guy that USC believes can get you to where they want to be, whether that's realistic or not.
Okay, Paul, you have to do one of those, early, super, way too ridiculous top 25s.
I do.
Let's go a little deeper than sort of the marquee teams there and hit me with a few that you think have a chance to be maybe, breakout teams, or that people are going to look at your early top 25 and say, really? You think they could actually, make that? Because if you're in the top 10 or around the top 10, that means if things break your way, you could maybe make a playoff. You could do a Michigan State and sort of sneak in there with one upset and a couple of things breaking your way. So who are some of those teams sort of outside the marquee teams that we've been talking about?
Yeah, you mentioned Florida before. I know Florida's a marquee program, but they haven't, won an SEC obviously in quite a time, haven't won an SEC East in quite a time. I think they're the best team in that division this year, or 2020. So they might qualify in a world of no parity of being the surprise team that could win the SEC.
If Florida is the best team in the SEC East next year, then the dynamic we're talking about with Kirby Smart is going to change drastically. If they don't even win the SEC East, then all of a sudden things get very interesting in Georgia as far as the where are we going and what are we doing here.
Yeah, so back in the top 25, I think the only 2 sleeper teams I would say are North Carolina, which I think everyone believes is going to be pretty good next year. They went 7-6 in Matt Brown's first year. They returned a really good QB in Sam Howell. A team I like is Cal. I think Cal's got like 18 starters back, most of their defense. Their quarterback, Garbers, went 7-0 in games he started and finished this year. And they won 8 games, so that shows you what he means. And Justin Wilcox, I don't know if he gets enough, respect's such an overused word, but enough hub for what he's done at Cal. I think he's done an outstanding job. So those are 2 sleepers. Notre Dame, Penn State, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson.
What about Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I could see it because you got Spencer Sanders and Chuba's coming back. When I did my top 25, I assumed Chuba was going to go. Yeah, they're interesting. Look, Oklahoma State every few years is good for an explosion. This could be a 10-win explosion.
I do keep wondering what year Oklahoma will take just enough of a step back that you'll notice it in the Big 12, right? Because they took a step back this year. They clearly were not as good this year offensively, even if they took a half step forward defensively. The offense wasn't as good, and they got blown out of the water in the playoff. But it didn't affect them that much in the Big 12. So my question is, what year will it finally affect them in the Big 12? We really haven't talked about Ohio State, and I want to bring up Justin Fields for a second, because I do think that one of the interesting stories going into next year will be sort of this Fields-Lawrence dynamic, and even that they're not playing each other, but conceivably, listen, we love to talk NFL draft. We don't necessarily, but the fans do. So there's going to be this dynamic of Fields and Lawrence are competing against each other, even though they're not on the field. It certainly looks like Ohio State will start next season in, 2 or 3, probably Clemson number 1. Do you think Fields could possibly become a true 1A to Lawrence's 1?
Yeah, isn't that? I think that's been established, right? Are we thinking that?
I kind of think so, but I'm wondering if is there any holdouts. I'm wondering if it was just me, because I've established that, but I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah, no. Certainly as a college player, I don't know enough about Fields I don't know anything about the NFL draft, so I can't really say how NFL teams view him. It seems to me going into next season that Lawrence is 1, but Fields is right there. I mean, and I expect those two teams to be right there too. So it's an interesting. It's going to become like Shipley and McCoy were roommates thing with the two of them from Georgia, and with the graphic with their little faces and the arrows. That's going to become tired. I don't know what he has left to prove. As in terms of getting, being commended as one of the top quarterbacks in the country. I think Lawrence and Fields are neck and neck.
So, Dan, I'm going to hit you with this one because you do the coaching searches stuff pretty well. Is there anybody who we are going to be talking a lot about next year as far as that's the guy on the rise? Like Norvell was sort of like the hot name this year in the AAC. It doesn't seem like there's that sort of obvious one. And the AAC has been the league where that tends to spawn the hot coach. Is it Luke Fickell maybe next year? He's coming off a couple of 10-win seasons. Is there a job that you're looking at that's other than USC that you think, man, that sucker is going to come open, or that's going to be one where I'm almost positive there's going to be some early season preparations to make a change there?
Boy, I haven't really started to think that far ahead yet on some of these. It's been fascinating to watch, the AAC get kind of picked over every single year, and now Norvell is gone, and you still got Ken Niumatalolo at Navy and Dana Holgorsen at Houston, and sort of the whole face of that league looks a little different. I actually think Memphis is going to be pretty good again with Ryan Silverfield. But 1 year, I don't think he's going to be the hot name. Josh Heupel, I don't really know what his stock is at UCF. Jeff Scott is just getting going at USF. So, where are the candidates coming from? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, you almost have to hit the reset button, but there's going to be a lot of movement next year. It seems like there's going to be more coaching movement than there is this year. So those coaches have to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and the one thing I didn't put on my look ahead, which I probably should have, is what's next for Urban, right? Like, he sat out another year. Again, as long as he is not employed as a coach, he will sort of be a specter hanging over the sport. And now, to a certain degree, I wonder if Chris Peterson becomes that too, Paul.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point about Peterson. I don't think yet. I think down the road he will come back. I don't think he's old enough to hang it up for good. Like Dan said, it's interesting to think about, every few years you go from, and it's not really even the number of jobs that come open, but you go from 21 or 18 jobs to 24. And of those 24, there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 that you qualify as wow jobs. I mean, to a degree. It's interesting to think, as Dan said, the combination of that potentially happening this coming off season after 2020, and it's kind of not a poor list, but a known list of commodities in terms of group of 5. So you're a big time school, and the A-list, the 3 A-list guys are gone. All of a sudden you're thinking, all right, so it's back to Brian Harsin and Luke Fickell and all those guys that we know and that we are established, that we've taken a look at before, and you're forced into a spot where maybe you're hiring someone that you don't feel crazy about, you're not in love with.
So 2019 is in the bag. We're going to sign off here. Dan Wolken from USA Today, Paul Myerberg from USA Today. Been a pretty good season. I think we could all use a little rest. I will see Dan again at the NCAA convention next week.
A lot of policy talk. Looking forward to go from football plays to policy, NCAA policy. That should be fantastic.
That sounds so interesting. Oh my God. Jeez, I'm so jealous I won't be there with you guys.
I had just a moment of desire to say, hey, what do you think about name, image, and likeness, Dan? And you know what? I realized I was just going to put the brakes on this whole thing.
Are those windows open?
Yeah, right. As we stare out onto Canal Street on a gray day in New Orleans, it seems like I don't think I've seen the sun since we got here, by the way. That's okay. It's been a good season. It was a great season for LSU. It was an interesting national championship game. Dan Wolken, Paul Myerberg from USA Today, thanks for joining me on the last AP Top 25 College Football podcast of the 2019 season. And now, 3 and out. First down. My last thought on Joe Burrow is this. At least for me personally, it has been hard throughout the season to fully buy into just how great this guy has been. In part because if you have ever been near Joe Burrow, he is not the most imposing or impressive looking athlete. Now, Trevor Lawrence is 6'6" and looks like he could bulk up to be an edge rusher in football. Justin Fields is built like a sideline to sideline linebacker, and he also happens to have the skills of a quarterback. In an arena where the sheer size of these gifted athletes is at times awe-inspiring, Burrow doesn't look much different than just any other athletic dude you'd see in a pickup game. Right up until the point where the game starts. I have always said Cam Newton was the single greatest college football player I have ever covered for one season. What he did with Auburn that year in 2010, leading them to a championship, to me, in a sense, was unprecedented. That was a so-so Auburn team, and he was just a transcendent player. I think Joe Burrow might have just nudged Cam into second place on that list for me. Second down. The final AP poll came out in the wee hours of last night after the championship game. I'm confident at least some Alabama fans will be none too pleased that their team was 8th, 1 spot behind Oklahoma. You might remember Alabama lost a 5-point game to LSU in November, and the Sooners lost to the Tigers by about 100 in the playoff. I always like to remind folks that the poll, especially the last poll, is a backward-looking exercise meant to reward teams for accomplishments more than project who would win a hypothetical matchup. Myself, I probably would have been tempted to bump Alabama a couple of spots higher, maybe 6. But here's a good way to sum up Alabama's season. Its most impressive accomplishment was beating Michigan. Do with that what you will. Third down. As of the moment of this taping, there is one more open FBS head coaching job, and that's Baylor. Washington State hired Hawaii's Nick Rolovich during the national championship game last night. Seems like a solid fit. Rolo's an offbeat guy, kind of like Mike Leach, but less abrasive, quite frankly, on his off days. Plus, his run-and-shoot offense has air raid flavors. As for Baylor, there were some rumblings around New Orleans that the Bears might have been waiting for Clemson to be done to talk to Brent Venables. Maybe even chat with Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator for Clemson. I'd really love to see Arkansas State's Blake Anderson get the job. I don't know how realistic that is. He probably should have been hired by Missouri before an uprising by boosters who deemed him not flashy enough to hire. So they tossed $4 million a year at Eli Drinkwitz instead, who has 1 season at App State as coach. Anderson has done well at Arkansas State, and you might remember he lost his wife before this season after she had a long battle with cancer. He deserves a shot at a Power 5 job because he's a good coach. And besides that, it would probably be a good time for him personally to start something new. Expect Baylor to wrap up soon, maybe even before you listen to this podcast. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Warren Levinson, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and at Westwood One Podcast. Please subscribe so you do not miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening all season. We don't stop in the off season, so come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.